So our last conversation was last May, and what was going on behind the scenes was my job as a social and emotional learning specialist. That job position was being wiped away, and a new job description where I would have to put forth the ideology as part of my job was written into the job description, and I was in a position to where I had to reapply for my job. I would have been guaranteed to get that job back. So I chose to not reapply and to put a lot of energy into and quote unquote alternative DEI structure and SEL structure, and I've been working on a set of ideas to kind of replace what's in our culture right now.
So just to clarify for what you're talking about, you're saying the ideology was being put into your job. You mean woke ideology was
Woke ideology was I was having to put forth and abide by that ideology.
Some of the positive ways to change what's happening and for parents to address what's happening and in their schools. And Jason, you've been working on, because you came from SEL, you were an educator for how long? 20 years?
21 years. Yeah.
21 years.
Yeah.
Can you tell people about, because I know a lot of parents are now familiar with CRT, what it is, how it's infiltrated the schools, but I think SEL is the next thing that parents need to learn about. Can you just do a brief, what is SEL?
Sure. Yeah. Parents may recognize the term soft skills or emotional intelligence, maybe character education, those types of things. That's the umbrella theme of what SEL is. When I started, SEL focused on, developing self-awareness, self-management, relationship skills, social awareness.
And SEL stands for
social and emotional learning. How do we cultivate those social and emotional learning skills, which is a fantastic idea. Those are how do we communicate effectively? How do we maintain healthy relationships? What do we do when we get really angry and upset? How do we manage this crazy ass thing called life? SEL is those types of skills. And around 2017 started to be a shift in practice. The trainings and things that I was attending were no longer about what I had just mentioned. Now we were moving into the new racial narrative of these people are privileged and these people are oppressed. Whiteness and everything that's really just embedded in the culture now started around 2017 in my immediate workplace. And I started asking questions that did not go well, as we've previously discussed. And fast forward to 2020, the whole national organization, the Collaborative for Academic and Social and Emotional Learning, CASEL, they completely shifted SEL to now reflect the ideology. So now in schools, social and emotional learning is taught from a philosophical lens that the individual is problematic, rather than.
What do you mean the individual's problematic?
Well, the individual is the problem for, or is the reason for injustice. Individual autonomy is the reason for, the reason why we behave badly. That's the underlying philosophical theme of the ideology. So now SEL is taught from a collectivist perspective. And
which is, I'll just interrupt for a second,
yeah.
which is what social justice is. It's a collectivist philosophy.
Right.
It says you judge and treat people differently based on what group, what racial group they're in, what sex group they're in, what sexuality group they're in, etc.
Right. But so what I discovered just through looking at human behavior and really, what is the cause of racism? Because I was attending all of these trainings that kept talking, root cause and, hours and hours of these DEI trainings, but there was nothing ever there. And clearly there is racism in our world, and clearly there is bigotry, and clearly there is all kinds of wrong stuff. So I started trying to figure, what is it? And it's essentially dehumanization. Like anytime we place somebody on the outside of the circle of us, we psychologically allow ourselves to harm those people. So when we absolve the individual into a group, we're automatically in our minds, in everybody's minds, allowing us to do harm,
them
like
outside.
real harm, not harm like I said potato and you prefer me to say potato. I mean like real physical violence, like what we see on the news when
Yeah.
we see these tragedies that we see.
Mhm.
It's because we're steadily increasing the human capacities for prejudice, aggression, and cruelty. Social justice, critical social justice, this intersectional Marxism, the successor ideology, whatever we want to call this thing in our culture, by the way it absolves the individual into a group and then puts the groups into conflict with each other over power and resources, it's never going to change. And
It's
if you
the same old. It's the same old racism. It's like the devil got a new trick. It's
right,
the same old bad
but
ideology, but with new packaging. Because it's still like we need to divide people into these
right.
racial groups.
Well, and it's not just white people against black people. If you look at all of the let's take the rainbow flag and that whole organization. If you look at the fighting and splintering and lack of getting along within the inclusion community, it's not working because even they are in conflict with each other over power
Oh
and
yeah.
resources.
Yeah.
So if we advance this thing has like 5 to 10 years to weed out of our culture, and it's going to take active pushing back, active, hey, let's do something different, hey, let's start talking about it differently so more people will come talk about things like this with us. So
Is that why you're calling your event with Free Black Thought? You guys are calling it fourth wave anti-racism
we're calling it fourth wave anti-racism. Yeah,
because you think it'll attract some of the woke.
we hope it attracts everybody. We hope that the notion of human dignity and strengthening our common humanity is appealing to everybody. That's a way. The biggest that I can make my circle of us is to include everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And until everybody is willing to take that on, it's to say, you know what, how big can I make my circle? Like, I don't give a shit what what you believe, who you are, what you want to do. As long as you don't harm people, you're with me. I want you to go be happy living your life in a way that is meaningful to you. Like, if we could get behind that idea, and how do we live and navigate in this society? Because there's other plans being made for us. And those plans are for us to be in perpetual conflict with each other, and for our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren to be in perpetual conflict. That's what the philosophy says. CRT is that academic thing that they only teach in law school, blah, 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 blah.
Allegedly.
Yeah. So it's like a smaller tool, and then social justice is just the overarching theme of advancing the rights for a group, and then SEL is a K-12 vehicle that deals with emotions. So a lot of the social justice and CRT ideas are being embedded and
Into
dispersed through social and emotional learning. Now, not all social and emotional learning. I recently co-authored an essay with Eric Smith and is released on the Free Black Thought Substack. But we really break down the different, because there is a SEL that has combined social justice and CRT, and that's called transformational SEL. And that's what happened in 2020. It really kind of no longer became SEL, but it became transformational SEL.
I think we have a link to this article you're talking about, by the way. If Pirate, if you can put that one on the screen while he's talking.
And if you're like, what the hell is like, what is this and this? And it's so like, it's supposed to be confusing because it's kicking this can down the road. I heard the word equity being used. And now when equity is that means equal outcomes. We're putting forth a radical idea of equal outcomes. But this is really breaking down the difference of the type of social and emotional learning that Eric and I are doing through Empowered Pathways versus what's happening in the world. And the metaphor for that is Eric and I are essentially minnows swimming upstream in a hurricane tornado. But we're raising awareness of what is happening, because one thing, human beings are social and emotional creatures by our design. Like that's what we do. That's how we interact. That's how we learn. That's how we grow. We form relationships, and we get mad, and we bounce back. We do all that. So we are trying to, and in this moment, we're all in a social and emotional crisis. These past 2 years have been hell on our humanity. They've been hell on our well-being. They've really been hard on relationships. So we're kind of being broken down on the social emotional level. So what we're doing is say, hey, it's not all bad. And for people that actually are looking to increase their personal well-being and increase relationships and increase just feeling better and being better and working with each other and not having elements of shame and resentment and mistrust in our groups, because that's what social justice does. Mm-hmm. We've developed, my big dream is, if empowered humanity theory, that's what we call it. If empowered humanity theory were embedded in every single DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion bureaucracy, and in every single social and emotional learning program, the woke idea, it would dissolve within 2 or 3 years. So if there was a way for me to get that into every single one of those bureaucracies, these six attitudes and practices, it would replace what's happening in our institutions.
So that article, just so everyone watching knows, Pirate dropped the link to it in the chat, and you can find, was tweeting something about how she would love to be able to explain slavery to someone, but she couldn't because CRT is banned. Now, first of all, you don't need CRT to talk about the history of slavery. We never had CRT in school when I was a kid, and we learned about the history of slavery. But second of all, she's admitting CRT exists and that people are trying to take it out of the public schools. And then in her comments, she had supporters who were then arguing it doesn't exist and that it's not in the schools. And so it's a conflict.
It's a stupid conflict. I majored in history, and I was a history teacher, and I taught slavery. I taught every single horrible thing that happened in human history. I taught it from a perspective of, this awful thing happened. Why did it happen? How can we avoid it? What principles did these things violate? And how can we, because I was told that's how we're supposed to use history. So when I see this stuff recently, like CRT isn't teaching real history, I'm like, that is absolutely not true. And if that's the argument that you're making, you don't know what CRT is. So that's another thing, is we have people advancing ideas that they don't even know what they mean. Most people don't realize that CRT is a neo-Marxist tool. So it's a tool that is designed to erode the individual.
Mhm.
So why use it if that's what the tool is purposed for?
Who either are busy like leaving the schools, creating their own schools, creating their micro schools or charter schools or places where they're already saying we're committed to independence, we're committed to being individuals, we're committed to the founding principles of America.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And then Jason's program perfectly aligns with them rather than having to go banging our head against the brick wall of the people who don't want us.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, I figured, thank you for that, Deb. You know, I figured I mean, this is a kind of a duh thing, but since social justice, they essentially blame bad human behavior for bad things that happen in the world. So it's like, well, how can we correct our behavior? So I came up with 6 attitudes and practices that if we practice those things day in and day out in real time over and over and over, that's what happens in our brains. We become what we practice. So if we're practicing compassion and kindness and awareness and dignity, and we are leading from a place of our core values versus our stereotyped identities, then we're developing ourselves in healthy, productive, compassionate ways that we've trained our brain to see somebody else as we see ourselves. So we're not going to harm those people.
I think both approaches are great. I mean, I'm one of those people who I'm kind of like, everyone has a different talent, a different tool, a different lived experience they can speak from, and different